Quick disclaimer here, and then let's get to it. Hi, my name is Hamzah Ahmed, and I'm just going to take as little time as possible out of your day to talk with you a little bit about what course registration looks like, what your NSC will provide you in terms of information, and I'll try to give you my perspective as an upperclassman, as somebody that's been in your shoes before, on what to expect. What this presentation is going to look like is I've divided it up into two parts. The first part is going to address some commonly asked questions that I've heard from freshmen going into their NSC and into registration, as well as questions that I had that I wish had been answered a little bit more thoroughly back when I was a freshman attending orientation. The second part is going to deal with tools specifically that you guys can use to effectively register. And my goal with that second portion is to just give you some knowledge about some like tools that you can leverage or include in your arsenal, as well as like some best practices for registration and for making sure that it goes as well as it possibly can. Um, and overall, my goal with this presentation is just to help you as an incoming freshman understand what's being thrown at you with the NSC and specifically with the registration portion, especially because in today's climate, you guys are going to be attending orientation online. I know for a fact that in my personal experience, the orientation was definitely a little bit overwhelming in terms of how much material was thrown at me. And I want to make sure that you guys are at least prepared and have had a taste of what's going to be presented to you in the orientation so that you guys can ask more informed questions, as well as so that you guys don't choke up and enter analysis paralysis. So, with that in mind, let's go ahead and get to the first part, which is, all of the questions that are probably floating around inside your head right now. So the first question I'd want to address is, how do I know what classes to take to hit the ground running? This is going to be your freshman year, and you want to make sure that you're making as much progress as you possibly can. And to that, I'd say number one, to look at your major's degree plan. This is it seems pretty obvious, but when you begin to look at these degree plans, specifically through A&M's course catalog, as well as through any sort of departmentally unique formatting, it begins to become a little bit more of a behemoth in terms of the amount of information that you have to parse through. And as a result, my second piece of advice is don't look at it in totality. Try to split it up as much as possible so that you can, adequately understand what you're looking at. So specifically, look number one, split it up by year. Number two, split it up by course designation. So um, specifically, designating courses as either major specific or you know general education slash university core curriculum classes. So as you guys can see, I have a sample degree plan from biomedical engineering, specifically from A&M's course catalog, and I've tried to show you guys what delineating that difference between courses looks like. So the courses in red are major specific, and the courses in blue are general slash UCC courses. And each of these categories have different characteristics to them. So major specific courses, for instance, those are courses with predefined positions in your degree plan. What that means is that the order that you take these courses in isn't exactly the most flexible. It's usually non-negotiable, especially for engineering. And because these classes are major specific, they're going to make up the bulk of your schedule. So as a result, you're going to be dedicating more time to these courses. So with that in mind, I'd suggest that, maybe focus a little bit more on your major specific courses when you're planning for your registration, just because these courses are going to be the lion's share of the work that you do, especially in this coming semester. So keep that in mind. That's not to neglect the general education and university core curriculum classes, because those classes are designed to make you a more well-rounded student, and these are just classes that you have to complete by graduation. There isn't necessarily a defined order, but even though the order is negotiable, I think that freshman students actually have a little bit more trouble navigating the UCC courses because the requirements are pretty prescriptive. Just to give you a taste of what that means, and please don't worry. I know that this is a lot on this slide. I'll walk you through it, and a lot of this information you will see again at your new student conference. But there are some keynotes that I want to, put on your radar. So there are different categories for UCCs, and each of these categories require different numbers of courses to complete those requirements. In addition to the UCC classes, you have general education requirements like the writing requirement, the ICD, CD requirement, and the citizenship requirement. Now, what I have done is I have bracketed out which of these UCC categories will effectively feed into those general education requirements. So for instance, communication classes, so long as they have a writing flag, will go towards fulfilling a writing requirement, hopefully. And if you are in engineering specifically, you don't need to worry about the two classes, worry about one. You'll take another class way down the road called Engineering 482, which is an ethics class. It's writing intensive. You'll be okay. What I want to point out specifically here is the ICD-CD requirement, because I've seen a lot of freshmen get tripped up by this. So there are two categories here that are at play. The UCC categories require you to take courses in different fields that fulfill those requirements for UCC. ICD and CD are different requirements, but you can fulfill those requirements using courses from these fields. So as I've noted here, the ICD-CD requirement requires one course with an ICD flag and one course with a CD flag. Now, more often than not, you're going to find courses with ICD flags and CD flags in these fields. And if you find one that is both in, let's say, language, philosophy, and culture, and has like an ICD flag, it'll count for both requirements. You'll kill two birds with one stone. And I've tried to link a couple of resources here for you guys to look at as well. This link specifically will help you find courses that have ICD and CD flags, as well as, help you find other UCC courses. This is a more centralized repository for UCC courses that will count towards different categories. And finally, this link will help address these requirements a little bit more. Last but not least, the foreign language requirement. It doesn't really get filled by a lot of the UCCs. You could use language and philosophy for it, but usually most people wind up satisfying it when they enter A&M, usually using 2 units of the same language that they took in high school. So for instance, if you took Spanish 1 and Spanish 2 in high school, you should be set. Now, let's say that you don't have that, you'll be scheduled to take a year of, foreign language at A&M. So last but not least, I want to reiterate the fact that you need to know your degree plan. You don't need to know all of it. You don't need to know it in totality, but try to know as much as you can. And one of the suggestions that I'd have for, getting to know your degree plan a little bit better is to make it from scratch. This is actually a degree plan that one of my friends made, but it helps you understand the mechanics behind how different courses feed into each other, how prerequisites work, what to expect from each semester as far as like credit hours. So consider, making your own degree plan. So the second question that regularly gets asked, and I think it ties back into the first topic that I discussed really well, is, what AP credits should I accept? And Unfortunately, and I know that it's not a fulfilling answer, the short answer is ask your advisor. Your advisor is going to be the one that knows best. However, I know that that is a little bit of an unsatisfying answer, which is why I've tried to make a longer form answer. I'd like to come out and say that this is, again, something that is grounded in personal opinion, personal experience, as well as my observations of other people. So, I'd say that the decision to accept credit is based on two key factors. The first factor being whether or not the credit that you are trying to redeem goes towards a major specific class or something in general education or UCC. And the reason why I say that is because as somebody that's been in your shoes, I would recommend trying to avoid crediting out of classes that are major specific because major specific classes that are going to form the backbone of your education, it's important to make sure that you have those foundations solid. Maybe it's been a while since you've taken that class, or maybe when you took the class, you also had six other classes on your back, so you didn't get to spend as much time and learn it in as much depth. Retaking the class will allow you to solidify your foundations as well as help you get a higher GPA. There are some counter arguments to that. And ultimately, I'd say that, in deciding it, if it's a major specific class, go to the second key factor, which is how familiar are you and how comfortable are you with the material? Not everybody interprets material the same way. I know that my understanding of calculus after I had finished my senior year is very different than someone else. So, me retaking calculus would have helped me, but for someone else, it would have been spinning their wheels aimlessly. So, know yourself, be careful, and once you've looked at all of your course equivalencies and you've evaluated which credits you want to redeem, double check with your advisor just to be sure. Because when you redeem your credits, that's a decision that you can't take back. Once you've redeemed them, they're on your transcript forever. Be careful, don't rush into it, and evaluate it thoroughly as well as get a second opinion from the professional. So another question that I remember especially having was how many hours should I be taking in my first semester? I was told take it as easy as possible because entering college is a rough adjustment. But also when I wound up taking my first semester, I felt a little bit bored because unfortunately not all hours are created equal. What that means is that, you know, some classes may be 3 credit hours, but they don't demand too much work from you. And another class may be worth 1 credit hour, and it may require the work of 3 classes. So how do you navigate that? Um, I'll touch on how to evaluate how demanding the courses, the prospective courses in your schedule are later on in the presentation when I discuss tools for registration. But for right now, keep in mind that even though not all hours are created equal, just the general rule of thumb that I've heard and that I've seen prove to be well worthwhile is that, 1 credit hour for each course is roughly equivalent to 3 study hours per week. So try to budget accordingly. And finally, I'd say that you are the expert on yourself, especially. So ask yourself, what did your high school experience look like in junior and senior year in terms of, how academically stressful it was? How many courses were you taking? How much work did you have to do? As well as how much decompression time did you need? Because burning out at the beginning of the race isn't a good idea. College is a marathon, so budget for a little bit of time necessary to try to snap back to reality in terms of, dealing with stress and all of that. And finally, how involved were you in extracurriculars? Some people are naturally involved in a lot more things and have their fingers in a lot more pies than others. Um, and because Texas A&M especially has a lot of those opportunities, do you see yourself being involved in more extracurriculars or less extracurriculars, and decide accordingly based off of that. But based off of my observations for like the average freshman, I tentatively suggest maybe 14 to 15 hours. That way, you're remaining on track with your degree plan, but you're also experiencing what A&M has to offer, and you're cementing the connections and interactions that you're going to have with people for the rest of your 4 years. So, again, if you're the type of person that, likes to be busy all the time, um, I know that I was like that, then, definitely push, 16 hours maybe. Um, so, um, with that in mind, I've been trying to keep this discussion as agnostic as far as majors are concerned as I possibly could. But as an engineering student, and trying to play to my qualifications and core competencies, one of the questions that I've heard a lot is, what is ETAM? I know that that was my question. What is ETAM? ETAM basically is A&M's program to increase student retention. And what it ends up looking like is that you spend your freshman year in general engineering, and at the end of your freshman year, so towards the end of your spring semester, most people will apply to their, major of choice. In order to do that first, there are some milestones that you need to hit. So you need to take two engineering courses. Those are built into your degree plan, as are the two math courses. And finally, you'll have to take two science courses. And I can't stress this enough. All of these courses need to be taken in residency at A&M. What that means is that, let's say that you took the AP Chem exam, got credit for two classes for chemistry. If you redeem those credits, that's not going to go to this requirement. You'll still need to take two science courses. So that is something to consider. Try to make sure that you hit these milestones so that you can apply to your choice of major at the end of the year. Now you're applying to your major. How do you get in? And the answer is that it's mainly GPA based. So students with a cumulative GPA above 3.5 or 3.5 on the dot are usually automatically admitted to their first choice College of Engineering major. It's an automatic ticket. As opposed to students with a GPA below 3.5, they apply through holistic review. And what that looks like is a collection of three essays that roughly benchmark, how invested you are in whatever majors you're applying to, what sort of interactions you've had with the majors, what your qualifications are. And usually that's applied to students like top 3 to 5 majors. But one thing that does need to be said is that applying for holistic review for certain majors is extremely difficult. So, for instance, computer science, CSCE, mechanical engineering, MEAN, or biomedical engineering, BMEN. These majors are not exactly the most um, favorable towards holistic review, especially because the average GPA for these majors tends to be pretty high, at least as far as admission from freshman year to sophomore year. So, especially if you are aiming to be in these three majors, you're going to want to try to make sure that your GPA is as high as possible. And again, this goes back to one of the reasons why I'd say to avoid redeeming AP credit for major specific courses. Not redeeming credit for for major specific courses allows you to get easier for 4.0s in classes and allows you to retain your above 3.5 GPA a little bit easier. So again, something to consider. That's me talking from my personal opinion. And this question does go back to being major agnostic at least. What are some things that I can do to set myself up for success, whether that's in ETAM or just as far as like your major goes? And I mean, I have like three sketched out points. These are in no way meant to be prescriptive or necessary, but especially in your freshman year, I'd suggest prioritizing maintaining a high GPA and building strong like work habits, time management habits, just because even though the likelihood of securing an internship as a freshman isn't that high, having a high GPA will still open doors for you. So it'll open doors for things like research. So try to maintain as high of a GPA as you possibly can. Uh, Number two, camp out at the advisor's office. The advisors at A&M are remarkable and they do a fantastic job. So, try to regularly follow up with them. Uh, I think that the sweet spot would be, meeting up with them once a month just to, number one, evaluate what your trajectory as far as like ETAM and your major is concerned, but also to try to get advance information on what your major looks like. Advisors are especially good at connecting you with staff in the major. So um, definitely try to maximize the amount of interaction that you have with your advisors. And finally, do what you can to engage with whatever your major is as early as possible. So for engineering students specifically, even though you are not technically in whatever major you're vying for, join professional societies, talk to professors. Alongside, maximizing your possibility of entering those majors, it also helps you solidify, whether that's the major that you really want to enter. So let's say that you're having a crisis of faith and you're stuck between computer science versus electrical engineering. Having some engagement with both departments will allow you to solidify, maybe which one you prefer. uh, do what you can to, you know, engage with your major as much as you possibly can. And with that, I'm probably going to close out. I don't want to take up too much of your time, like I said at the beginning, but I will be releasing the second part as a separate video, as well as something that I'm currently working on, which is a demo for what registration will look like. But everything, all of the links that I showed you, as well as the presentation that you guys just saw will be in the description below. So feel free to click on those.